What's up guys, so around a year ago I created the Mario Kart Wii Competition Hub, which is basically a custom track competition network similar-ish to the likes of CT Jams. Basically the main premise of these competitions is that a bunch of people create custom tracks and then everyone on the Mario Kart Wii Competition Hub server is able to rate these tracks between 1 and 10. In the end, all of these ratings are combined into average scores and the track with the highest average score wins the competition. And now that the Mario Kart Wii Competition Hub has completed its first year of existence, I'm gonna be ranking every track that has been submitted to these competitions in 2024. Before we start though, let's quickly clarify some things. First off, as always, this ranking is completely based on just my own opinion, so the actual results of each competition will have no influence in this ranking. Secondly, since there's 4 different competition formats which can get kind of complicated, I'm putting some quick explanations for all formats on the screen right now, so feel free to read through those. Some of my tracks will also be included in this ranking. I'll try to stay as objective as possible, but just take this ranking with a bit of a grain of salt. I should also mention that disqualified tracks will not be included in this ranking. Most of them aren't playable Mario Kart Wii custom tracks either way. Out of the only 2 disqualified tracks that you can play in Mario Kart Wii, one of them is a texture hack of another custom track, and the other one is literally DS Desert Hills. So I don't really see a point in including these disqualified tracks. Lastly, I quickly want to thank you guys for 500 subs. I am eventually still gonna do the Q&A, but I haven't really gotten many serious questions yet, so if you got some questions about me or my channel or my custom tracks, feel free to post them in the comment section down below. And now that everything has been said, let's start off the ranking. 129, MKWii Black Ice Freeze 4. This track was made by Show and myself for the 4th EXTR competition where it placed last. This is definitely a remake of Sparkling Pass. Yeah, no, there's a reason why this got the lowest ever score that we've seen so far. The entire track is literally just a tiny cube. There's no track design and the race ends after like 15 seconds. I mean, you can literally see that I'm playing the same clip over and over again because there's just not enough footage here. Also, let me just quickly say, we'll be in joke track territory for a while, so yeah, enjoy, I guess. 128, LeBron James. This track was made by Bits for the Bad EXTR3 competition where it placed first. So for anyone confused about the placement, this competition was basically split into 2 sub-competitions, with one of them having the goal of making the best possible track and the other having the goal of making the worst possible track. And yeah, I think you all can see where this is going. So what did Bits do to accomplish this win? First off, this track is incredibly long. Trust me, once you play this, Mushroom Peaks will feel like SNES Ghost Valley 2. Secondly, and this should be considered a war crime, towards the end of the track there are literally invisible out of bounds areas, and if you drive into them you will get respawned to the very start of the track without getting a lap count. What saves this track from dead last place in this ranking is the fact that it at least has a track design, and without the invisible out of bounds areas this could be sort of fun, I guess. 127, Black Ice Freeze. This track was made by Epic Crossover and myself for the 1st EXTR competition where it placed last. And no, your phone brightness isn't too low, this track is literally invisible. Now there are multiple other tracks with a similar concept to this, but the original Black Ice Freeze is definitely the worst one as it is the most invisible and the split pathways just make it more confusing. At least the track is fairly short, so it's not really the most painful thing ever. 126, Black Ice Freeze 3. This track was made after the deadline of the competition and the authors could not come up with a name, but please give this track a 10, this track is really cool. That right there was not my commentary, that was literally just the actual name of the track. So this track was made by Epic Crossover and myself for the Bad EXTR3 competition where it placed second. Unlike the original Black Ice Freeze, this track is actually a little bit visible. In turn though, it has a much more difficult track design. There are multiple really sudden turns, so even if you can see a little bit, there is still a chance you might fall off a lot. 125, Black Ice Freeze 2, the overly grown past of irrational decisions. This track was made by Epic Crossover and myself for the 2nd EXTR competition where it placed last. While it's a little bit less visible than Black Ice Freeze 3, the track design here is quite a bit easier and more fun. Thankfully though, we're now gonna get to some tracks that you can actually see. 124, Baum 2, Gartenkarotte. This track was made by Elemental and Iggy the Koopa for the Bad EXTR3 competition where it placed 3rd. And honestly, this is just a pretty difficult track. Especially the giant boost panel can easily kill you, and if you fall off the track, you get respawned in a very bad position. Once you learn how to play this track though, it can be sort of enjoyable, I guess. 123, This is a Circle. This track was designed by Fawn Tinterkit and created by Epic Crossover for the 8th CTSS competition where it placed last. And I mean, the name already already says it, this track is literally just a circle, and there's an incredibly slow speed mod. It is technically more functional than the previous tracks, but like, why would you ever play this? 122, 3DS Test Square. This track was made by Pooks for the 3rd MRFI competition where it placed last. And yeah, this track is just another absolute nothing burger. The track is literally a square and that's it. Speaking of square tracks, 121, codename Bitbox. This track was made by Bits and Melodic Cat Girl for the 3rd MRFI competition where it placed 11th. So yeah, it's another square track, but at least the road is trickable and it can be sort of fun to hop over the edges, I guess. On the downside though, if you fall off anywhere on the track, you'll be stuck in an infinite respawn loop. 120, Black Ice Freeze 4, one of the authors got pooped on by a pigeon and is now sad. This track was made by Epic Crossover and myself for the 4th EXTR competition where it placed 10th. Compared to the previous 3 Black Ice Freeze tracks, this one is definitely a lot more functional. It is easily the most visible of the Black Ice Freeze tracks, and it also has the most simplistic track design out of them, which makes it a lot easier to play. The simplistic track design also works against the track a little bit though, as it can get pretty boring. 119, RMX Rainbow Meow Road. This track was made by Melodic Cat Girl and Kura for the 3rd MRFI competition where it placed 10th. This actually has multiple really cool design ideas, it's just a super long track. And it doesn't really help that the track is filled with multiple really long straightaways. At least unlike the original Rainbow Meow Road, you don't have to drive this one backwards. 118, Luigi Circuit RTX Off. This track was made by Bits, I Swear Chris and Forn Tinterkid for the 5th EXTR competition where it placed 22nd. And this track is interesting to say the least. There's a lot of really cursed objects such as these Luigi cows, not to mention the fact that if you drive into the toads, you literally crashed your game. And like, it's not very easy to go around the toads, so even if you don't want to drive into them, you can still easily crash your game. It is a very funny track, but not really a super functional one. 117, Black Ice Freeze 5, we promise this is the last one.
Are you sure about that?
This track was made by Epic Crossover and myself for the 5th EXTR competition where it placed last. And yeah, for Black Ice Freeze standards, this track is fairly visible and also has a pretty fun track design. So it's easily the best Black Ice Freeze track, it's just still not really that good overall. 116, RMX Scheisse. This track was designed by Kozakura and created by Bits and Forn Tinterkid for the 8th CTSS competition where it placed 9th. This is just another pretty strange track. There's a lot of really blind turns, and once you get to the end of the track, you'll have to drive around it multiple times to finally start getting lap counts. So obviously it's still not super functional, but it's actually a bit more interesting than the previous tracks that we've talked about. And I'm just realizing we're not even halfway through the joke tracks yet, oh boy. 115, C-Tools Parkway. This track was made by Melodic Cat Girl and Citrus for the 5th EXTR competition where it placed 21st. And this is easily the most confusing track here. The entire collision of the track is just completely messed up, so you'll just get a bunch of collision bugs. These can range anywhere from not being able to cross the starting line, to getting stuck on the bridge, to just randomly flying into the air for no reason. It's actually very entertaining to play, just not really functional at all. 114, Bubble Course 4. This track was made by Melodic Cat Girl for the 5th EXTR competition where it placed 19th. I know I should probably have this track in first because it was modeled in Minecraft, but besides that, it's just a pretty empty, simplistic and overscaled track. Unlike most of the previous tracks though, there's not really anything necessarily bad about this one. 113, Codename Blue Screen 2, I'm running low on time, help. This track was made by Mackerel Dude 123 for the 4th EXTR competition where it placed 9th. This is another really simplistic joke track. There's one pretty tight turn, but otherwise it's just pretty forgettable. I do find it pretty funny that the secret area that this track was required to have is basically just one square. 112, yeah, man, these track names are truly something. This one was designed by Show and created by GeForce for the 8th CTSS competition where it placed 8th. Despite what it looks like, it's actually a pretty interesting track. Basically, the collisions of this track are determined by what color of the picture you're driving on. The track design is actually not bad, the collision can just get a bit weird sometimes. 111, Sherbet Iceway. This track was made by Turret Hackfan and myself for the 1st EXTR competition where it placed 14th. I don't think it's difficult to tell that this track was modeled using Microsoft Paint. With the track design being this simplistic, this track should probably be a little bit lower on the ranking, but since the road collision is double-sided, it can make for some pretty hilarious moments. 110, Kart Ride into Compub. This track was made by Pooks for the 5th EXTR competition where it placed 17th. For being a joke track, this one's actually not way too bad. The track is actually sort of fun to drive through, and the design is done in a pretty interesting way. There isn't easy to get no lap count though, so that's what prevents us from placing higher. 109, Scheisse. This track was made by myself for the 2nd MRFI competition where it placed last. It's another square track like Codename Bitbox or 3DS Test Square, but it's slightly more interesting to play because of the brown oil on the track. Yeah, it's definitely brown oil. It's actually kind kinda fun to avoid. 108, Fiery, Freezy, Flamey, Frosty, Fire, Freeze, Flame, Frostway. This track was made by myself and Epic Crossover for the first EXTR competition, where it placed 11th. It's one of the more simplistic, but in turn also one of the more functional joke tracks. As such, it definitely deserves to be at the higher end of this category, although it's still not really interesting to play at all. 107, Codename Blue Screen. This track was made by Mackerel Dude 123 for the Bad EXTR3 competition, where it placed 4th. It definitely has a more interesting track design than Codename Blue Screen 2. It's actually pretty fun to go through the final section as fast as possible without falling off. Besides that though, it's another pretty simplistic joke track. 106, Warriors Gold. This track was made by Elemental for the 6th FCFS competition, where it placed last. I probably should place this lower because it's a pretty difficult track, but it's honestly just really fun to try to play this track without falling off. There's actually some pretty complex tech here if you want to play the track perfectly, so that definitely makes this one of the most interesting joke tracks to play. 105, Rainbow's Baseline. This track was made by Xander Kart Wii for the 2nd EXTR competition, where it placed 15th. We have finally arrived at our first non-joke track, and honestly, it's one of the most forgettable on this list. There isn't really anything necessarily that bad about this track, it's just extremely simplistic. The visuals could also be clearer at some sections, but otherwise this was a solid effort. 104, White Ice Freeze. This track was made by Melodic Cat Girl for the 5th EXTR competition, where it placed 18th. Yeah, this is much better than the Black Ice Freeze tracks. And I'm not saying that because I'm racist. Like, I am racist, but I don't prefer this track because I'm racist. The track actually starts off looking completely normal on the first lap, and then only on lap 2 it slowly fades into the completely white visuals. Even then though, unlike the Black Ice Freeze tracks, this one has a minimap, so it's much easier to play through it. And that combined with a decent track design definitely makes this one of the better joke tracks. 103, Watcher's Trip to Albania. This track was made by myself, Epic Crossover, and Watcher X1221 for the 2nd EXTR competition, where it placed 16th. It's another pretty simplistic joke track, but the Zinc coastline design is okay, I guess, and the entire track is trickable, which definitely adds some cool gameplay elements. 102, Lake Erie. This track was made by Elemental for the 7th FCFS competition, where it placed last. And yeah, we're definitely getting to the best last places here. This is another pretty simplistic track, but the layout is decently fun overall. The half-pipe section is a bit jank though, definitely. I could have probably ranked this higher if it wasn't for that section. 101, EXTR Rainbow Tunnel. This track was made by Iggy the Koopa for the 2nd EXTR competition, where it tied for 11th. I honestly kind of get why this placed above some of the serious tracks from the same competition. The gameplay is just dumb fun. Like, there's technically nothing interesting about it, but it's just pretty fun to perform some weird tricks. 4 laps for this is definitely an interesting choice though. 100, Unhinged Shade. This track was made by Epic Crossover and myself for the first EXTR competition, where it tied for 12th. Like many other tracks around here, this one just has a pretty simplistic track design. There's nothing bad about it, but it's just a definition of a mid-track. 99, The Blocking. This track was made by Watcher X1221 for the 5th EXTR competition, where it placed 14th. Once again, it's a very simplistic layout, but there's actually a decent shortcut that even utilizes the Grumble Volcano Falling Rock object. So I can't say it's a bad track in any way. 98, Codename Windows 96. This track was created by Pyraming Star and Epic Crossover for the first MRFI competition, where it placed last. For last place standards though, this really isn't bad. The visuals are rather unexciting, but the track is pretty fun to play overall. My only issues here are the last turn, which is pretty janky, and the fact that some of the Piranha Plant objects can block the entire track. We're definitely starting to get into the more interesting layouts though. 97, Green World Loop. This track was made by Epic Crossover and Luigi Story for the 2nd EXTR competition, where it placed 17th. This one actually has fairly interesting gameplay, mostly because you can actually utilize the off-road glitch by going on this bounce pad. Besides that, it's another simple but rather nice track. 96, Bubblegum Heights, but it's a GCN Peach Beach tournament. This track was created by Melodic Cat Girl for the 5th EXTR competition, where it placed 20th. This would have probably placed a bit lower if I didn't have a massive bias for mushroom tracks, but I also can't really place it higher than this because it's honestly just a really hard track. This difficulty comes down mostly to the track only having 3 respawn points. If you know a little bit how the collision of mushrooms works though, this shouldn't be way too hard and in fact can be a pretty fun challenge. 95, RMX Blue Loop. This track was made by Epic Crossover and myself for the Bad EXTR3 competition, where it placed last. This is about as basic as a joke track can get. It's just a road and pretty much nothing else. Twilight Trinity serves as a good base layout though, so the gameplay here is decent enough. 94, Kindling Argentine Drift Waterfront. This track was made by Epic Crossover for the 2nd EXTR competition, where it placed 14th. Epic Crossover made 4 color-based remakes for Zinc Coastline, which are all pretty similar to each other. The dark gray one is definitely the weakest though, because the track is played backwards here. I just find the Zinc Coastline layout to work slightly better forwards. There is also a pretty crazy ramp ramp towards the end. 93, some stadium track, but the fire went on vacation. This track was made by Luigi Story for the 6th FCFS competition, where it placed 10th. And I'm happy to say that we're slowly but surely approaching the last joke tracks here. This one has a pretty fine layout, some strange ramps, but nothing too bad. 92, Chantic Circuit. This track was made by Epic Crossover, Kozakura and Xander Kart Wii for the first MRFI competition, where it placed 5th. Once again, it's just a pretty simplistic but fairly fun layout, until you get to the final turn where the game decides to hate you. Nah, it's not that dramatic, but if you play it for the first time, it definitely comes a bit unexpected. 91, Wiggler Ski Slope. This track was created by myself and Show for the 2nd EXTR competition, where it placed 7th. I'm probably placing this a bit lower than most people, but I've just always considered this to be one of my weakest non-joke tracks. Not that it's bad though, the Wiggler is pretty hilarious. But yeah, besides maybe the cannon, there's just nothing that stands out about the gameplay. 90, Arctic Volcano. This track was made by Char6432 and Epic Crossover for the 1st EXTR competition, where it placed 9th. Here we have another rather simplistic track. A few sections are definitely a bit overscaled, but some sections are also quite fun to play. The shortcut at the start feels impossible on some vehicles. Still a solid track though. 89, Original Woodlands. This track was made by Epic Crossover and Xander Kart Wii for the 1st EXTR competition, where it placed 8th. And who would have thought, it's another pretty simplistic track. Compared to the previous track though, the layout here feels a lot more natural. Though as a trade-off, the visuals here are definitely a bit weaker. Either way, not too much to dislike here. 88, Freezing Burnway. This track was made by Toadette Hackfan and Paper Toadette for the 1st EXTR competition, where it placed 10th. This track is actually loaded with potential. There are some great visual ideas and the layout actually has a lot of interesting sections. What keeps this track from placing higher is mostly the outside section, as it's very long and completely empty. 87, Sparkling Archipelago. This track was made by Kura for the 4th EXTR competition, where it placed 8th. Like Freezing Burnway, this track also has multiple more interesting and less interesting sections. Overall though, this track definitely feels a bit overscaled, which it makes up for by having an absolutely hilarious secret area. 86, Grumblegum Heights. This track was made by Lucio Wins for the 5th EXTR competition, where it placed 7th. I'd imagine a lot of people will probably have this track much higher than I do, and there are definitely quite some qualities to this track. It's very solid visually and it sticks very well to its Grumble Volcano theme. The reason why I got this so low is more on the gameplay side. The road is really bumpy at parts and one of the split pathways is basically useless. Besides that, it's still very much a fine track. I mean, you can see by the rating that we're well past the bad tracks here. 85, Galactic Freezeburn. This track was made by Xander Kart Wii, Epic Crossover and King Boo Gaming for the 1st EXTR competition, where it placed 5th. Theming wise, this is definitely one of the most interesting tracks from EXTR 1. The custom Goombas look particularly cool. However, we have another case here of gameplay that just doesn't really manage to stand out very much. Maybe if the cannons were trickable, this could be a little bit higher. 84, OMG, another very original GBA BC3 themed track. This track was created by MackerelDude123 for the 5th EXTR competition, where it placed 16th. Out of all the joke tracks on this list, this is definitely one of the most interesting gameplay wise. Sure, the track is rather short and the layout isn't far too complex, but the entire road is trickable, which means you can pull off some pretty cool looking turn skips. That alone makes this track enjoyable enough to place here. 83, Everything But the Kitchen Sink. This track was created by myself and Atmosphere for the 2nd EXTR competition, where it placed 8th. This is definitely one of the most interesting looking joke tracks. There's quite a bit of detail in the background and it honestly doesn't look bad, which is impressive considering it only uses textures from Coconut Mall and Mario Circuit. There's definitely some creative visual ideas here, like the glow effect being used for the stovetop. Gameplay wise, it's as simplistic as you'd guess for a joke track. 82, Cerise Excursion. This track was made by Epic Crossover for the 2nd EXTR competition, where it tied for 11th. We already saw Kindling Argentine Drift Waterfront a bit earlier, and this basically is the same concept. It is a color-based remake of Zinc Coastline, of course being the red one. I'd say it's probably the most generic out of them. It's basically just the normal forwards version of the track. The only thing that this one has to stand out is a single boost ramp that's not present in the other versions. In any case, this track is decent enough, although pretty forgettable. 81, Amazing Raceway Track. This track was made by MackerelDude123 for the 2nd MRFI competition, where it placed 4th. For being a fairly generic circuit track, this one has a pretty fun layout. There's a pretty good use of sidewalks and boost panels. There really isn't too much to criticize here, as you can see with the score that I gave this track, but I just find many other tracks to be more interesting to play, simply put. 80, Iggy Circuit EXTR Mario Circuit. This track was made by Iggy Zakupa for the 2nd EXTR competition, where it placed 5th. It is another fairly generic circuit track, but it does take a few more risks with its layout. There are some pretty neat shortcuts here and there, although some of them can also be a little bit confusing at times. But I think you can tell that it's getting progressively more difficult to point out bigger issues with these tracks. 79, Sunset Skyway. This track was made by MackerelDude123 for the Good EXTR 3 competition, where it placed 5th. Similarly to the previous few tracks, this has a pretty basic but pretty solid layout. Some of the ramps are used in pretty creative ways, but the cannon exit can be a bit tough on some vehicles. 78. EXTR Waluigi Stadium. This track was made by Iggy Zakupa for the second EXTR competition where it placed 6th. This actually got some pretty interesting layout choices. There are some good shortcuts, although most of them are also quite difficult. The track is also quite jank, but it's made up by the fact that it's pretty fun to play still. I can also appreciate the secret area, which basically is just another entire track. 77. Parching Grease. This track was made by Epic Crossover and Char6432 for the first EXTR competition where it tied for 12th. Yes, I know this is a rather low effort joke track, but I actually happen to like some of the design choices here, weirdly enough. The first 2 ramps are especially satisfying to take. 76. First Falls. This track was made by AlexTG4517 for the 6th FCFS competition where it placed 6th. It probably isn't fair to put this track this low because ATG clearly put a lot of effort into it, and it does look really good visually, I gotta say. But I do care a lot more about gameplay, and this track's gameplay has some issues for sure. Multiple sections feel too empty, and as a result this track drags on quite a bit. To be fair, this was ATG's first track since his comeback, and he did dramatically improve after this. 75. Moo Moo Queendom. This track was made by Kura and Melodic Cat Girl for the 3rd MRFI competition where it placed 7th. Again, I probably should place this track quite a bit higher. It does look appealing visually once again and actually has really good shortcuts. The issue with this track is that it's littered in bugs. Most notably, this track crashes in versus race, so you can only play it in time trials, which obviously is quite a bit more boring. Also, the Monty molds just explode, which is quite funny actually. I can't even be mad about that. 74. Verglass Volcano. This track was made by Luigi Story and Epic Crossover for the first EXTR competition where it placed 4th. This is a really intense track for sure. It has everything from bouncing fireballs to thrums to extremely tight slippery road. It is a pretty hard track, but it's also quite fun to play, and the shortcut at the start is really cool too. 73. EXTR DK Summit. This track was made by Potato Man 44 for the 5th EXTR competition where it placed 9th. I can definitely appreciate this track for including many of the ideas from the original DK Summit. The cannon should have been made trickable though, because it really drags down the pace quite a bit. Besides that, there are some good shortcuts and the visuals ain't bad either. 72. Psychological Aftermath. This track was made by Epic Crossover and myself for the first EXTR competition where it tied for 6th. By the way, the only thing that I did on this track was moving an item route by half a millimeter. Anyways, this track is quite fun to play. There are some good split pathways, ramps and shortcuts, and I also like the bright, vibrant textures that were used here. Besides the split pathway section though, the layout is definitely still more on the basic side. 71. Boy Kisser Circuit. This track was designed by Kura and created by Melodic Cat Girl and Atmosphere, not Mr. Sphere, for the 8th CTSS competition where it placed 6th. This actually does a pretty good job at making the Boy Kisser meme into a layout. I especially like the path changing concept here as it's utilized quite well. The track is pretty small scaled and more on the difficult side definitely. 70. Bubblegum in Space. This track was made by Citrus for the 5th EXTR competition where it placed 12th. This is just your definition of a pretty basic but pretty solid Rainbow Road track. The visuals are clean and there is a good use of boost panels and ramps. There isn't too much variety in the layout or the visuals though, so this track is definitely more on the forgettable side. 69. Monochrome Malnourished. This track was made by Epic Crossover and Xander Kart Wii for the first EXTR competition where it tied for 6th. This track is nice. In all seriousness, this does have a pretty good layout with some cool strats here and there. It's actually quite similar to Psychological Aftermath in a lot of ways, so it makes sense that they place really close together. 68. Super Luigi World LTR Yoshi's Island. This track was created by Iggy Zakupa and King Boo Gaming for the first EXTR competition where it placed 2nd. While this is our lowest podium track besides bad EXTR 3, I can't say it's bad at all. The theming and visual style is definitely done quite well here. I can't say the layout is bad either, but it's definitely more basic than what we usually see in the top 3. 67. MK Waffle's Basement. This track was made by myself for the 3rd MRFI competition where it placed 8th. Yes, it is super delusional of me to put this track this high, but let me explain. Besides the fact that this track is like half a century long, I do actually like quite some of the layout ideas. Some sections are pretty empty, but others in turn are quite fun. The visuals are fine as well, I'd say, but yeah, obviously I've made much better tracks in the past. 66. DS Sparkling Resort. This track was made by Iggy Zakupa for the 6th FCFS competition where it placed 9th. There are definitely quite some good design choices on this one. There are some neat ramp shortcuts, and I also like the half-pipe section. There are some bugs here and there, like the half-pipe at the start not working properly, and the track was also technically submitted under a slot where it crashes, but I'm gonna let that slide. 65. Wii U Bone Dry Dunes. This track was created by Iggy Zakupa for the 2nd MRFI competition where it placed 5th. We have reached the halfway point of the ranking, so I guess this is the most average track of 2024, which I think definitely makes sense. It is quite a good remake of Bone Dry Dunes and has some pretty cool ideas. The road can be a bit bumpy at parts, but the track does have a good use of split pathways. 64. Moo Moo Islands. This track was made by Bits for the good EXTR3 competition where it placed last. Yeah, this is easily the best out of the last place tracks. While some sections are a bit overscaled, there are definitely quite some good design choices here and there. I especially like the bridge section. It may not be the greatest track visually, but I can look past that as it was Bit's first custom track. He improved very drastically, very fast after this, so you'll definitely see some of his tracks much higher on this list. 63, Viridescent Esplanade. This track was made by Epic Crossover for the second EXTR competition where it placed 9th. This is the third of our 4 color-based Zinc Coastline remakes, and it's definitely the best looking one. There's a great use of trees and the green water looks quite nice. Gameplay wise, it's quite similar to Cerise Excursion, so nothing too exciting, but very solid nevertheless. 62, Spooky Heights. This track was made by Todded Hackfan for the 5th EXTR competition where it placed 13th. While this is another pretty simplistic track, especially on the visual side, it does do some good things gameplay wise. The scaling is great and some of the ramps are really fun to take. 61, Dino Ruins. This track was created by Pooks for the 5th EXTR competition where it placed 5th. I'll be honest, this would have probably been higher if I hadn't taken like an hour just to record footage for this. And it's not even the track's fault, the game just wouldn't give me triple mushrooms for the love of God. And they're like one of the most common items in the game. Mario Kart Wii is rigged. Anyway, besides that, this track is quite nice. There are a lot of cool ramps and great shortcuts, one of which requires triple mushrooms. My only real issue with this that doesn't come from me being salty is that some sections feel a bit overscaled. 60, Scaredy Rat's Spooky City. This track was made by Kura for the 7th FCFS competition where it placed 3rd. This was a pretty hard one to rank because it does have a lot of amazing design choices, but it's also a really difficult track. There are some very sudden and tight turns here. The more you get into this track though, the more fun it becomes. 59, Riverside Rush. This track was designed by Potato Man 44 and created by Mackerel Dude 123 for the 8th CTSS competition where it placed 7th. This is a short but sweet track definitely. The turns could be a bit smoother, but there is a good half pipe and some other good ramps. 58, Night Sky Lake. This track was made by Elemental for the 2nd EXTR competition where it placed 4th. This is another rather simplistic but really fun track. The shortcuts are done quite well, but nothing about the track design really stands out that much. 57, Doomsday of Tomorrow. This track was made by Char6432 and Epic Crossover for the 4th EXTR competition where it placed 6th. This track greatly benefits from having an unintended shortcut at the half-pipe section, which is really satisfying to take. Besides that, the track is quite short but has some good layout choices definitely. 56, Mountainside Mario Circuit. This track was made by Kozakura for the Good EXTR3 competition where it placed 3rd. For some reason, whenever I play with randomized tracks, this is always one of the first to be picked. Either way, it's once again another more simplistic track, but it does make great use of ramps and boost panels. 55, Poisonous Detour. This track was made by Epic Crossover for the 6th FCFS competition where it placed 8th. Visually, this is definitely more basic than what we've seen from the previous few tracks, but I do think the layout here is very nicely done. There is a good use of ramps, especially towards the end of the track. 54, CH, EXTR, RMX, Wii, N64, Mario Baumway, Light, IXL, VIP. This track was created by Elemental and myself for the 5th EXTR competition where it placed 8th. Once again, we have a rather short and simplistic track here. The base layout isn't anything too special, but what brings this track up is the shortcut. It is very satisfying to take and makes this track quite fun to replay. 53, KV Cape. This track was made by Kozakura for the 6th FCFS competition where it placed 5th. This is like the standard Kozakura track. The visuals are quite nice and the layout is fun too. This is once again kept quite simple though, less so than the previous couple tracks, but it does make this track a bit harder to remember. 52, Lazoline Lake. This track was made by Epic Crossover for the 2nd EXTR competition where it placed 13th. This is our final color-based Zinc Coastline remake and it's definitely the best one. The main reason why I prefer this over the other 3 is because there is a pretty cool invisible shortcut. Besides that, I also appreciate the Koopa Zappers and the light blue visual style works in the track's favor too. 51, Piercing Journey. This track was made by Epic Crossover for the 1st MRFI competition where it placed 4th. While this is once again another pretty simplistic and short track, it does have a really cool turn skip shortcut towards the end and there are some good ramps as well. One turn is really tight but definitely manageable on Flame Runner. 50, Warriors Crystal Chasm. This track was made by Bits, I Swear Chris and Forn Tintikid for the 5th EXTR competition where it placed 4th. We finally made it out of this massive streak of simplistic tracks. This actually takes a lot of risks layout wise and also looks amazing visually. Maybe it took too many risks though because apparently the KMP got messed up and then had to be deleted entirely. So as a result, there are no item boxes or objects here, which does make this track feel more empty than it probably should. If it wasn't for that, this track would be much higher on the list. 49, Boring Beach Track. This track was created by Melodic Cat Girl for the 5th EXTR competition where it placed 15th. I'm definitely placing this track way too high. It is a very stupid track. This is like Shy Guy Beach but on steroids. But for some reason I just can't help but find this unironically really fun to play. The bombs are done in a way that they're not really too annoying but just a pretty fun challenge to avoid. 48, LTR Coconut Mall. This track was made by Iggy Zakupa and King Boo Gaming for the first EXTR competition, where it placed 3rd. This is definitely one of the most creative remake tracks that I've seen in EXTR competitions to this day. Somehow this actually manages to be extremely faithful to both Coconut Mall and Burning Freezeway at the same time. Some sections are a bit big, but it's not really too much of an issue for me. 47, Nintendo HQ. This track was made by Char6432 for the 7th FCFS competition, where it placed 4th. Not only does this have an absolutely hilarious theme with some peak signs, but it also actually has a really interesting layout idea. I like how you have to drive around the headquarter building to finish a lap. It is a bit confusing though, to be honest. Like, there are signs, but it's definitely still a bit easy to miss. Still, I have a lot of fun replaying this one. 46, Thromb Fortress. This track was made by Kozakura for the 3rd MRFI competition, where it placed 6th. Like most Kozakura tracks, this one has pretty good gameplay. There are some nice ramps and the Thromb objects are used quite well. It definitely isn't a standout track in any aspect, but it's very nice nevertheless. 45, Dry Track. This track was made by Potato Man 44 for the 3rd MRFI competition, where it placed 9th. While the visuals here are definitely more basic, although still very nice, I just really enjoy this track's gameplay. Great ramps, great split pathways, great scaling, just an all-around fun track. 44, Koopa Heights. This track was made by the Gaming Bram for the 5th EXTR competition, where it placed 1st. So yeah, here's our first winning track, besides LeBron James. I might be underrating this a bit, but I do think this definitely is the weakest winner. The visuals do look very good, of course, but I just find the gameplay not as great as with most other winners. I definitely don't think it's bad, otherwise I wouldn't be this high on the list. But there's definitely some pretty noticeable issues, like one really overscaled turn and the pipes feeling quite janky. Bram has definitely made much better tracks gameplay-wise, but in any case, despite my criticism, this track is still very, very solid. 43, Mimi's Financial Empire. This track was made by Blue Bat Star for the 7th FCFS competition, where it placed 2nd. I might have some bias on this one because Super Paper Mario is one of my all-time favorite video games, but this track simply has so many cool ideas. The whole track is extremely faithful to the level that it's based on, and the layout takes quite a few risks at points. These don't always pay off though, as some sections are quite difficult. It is cool though that the track was also designed to be easily completable backwards. 42, Frigid Fjords. This track was made by Pooks for the 3rd MRFI competition, where it placed 4th. This is definitely a more simplistic layout for Pook standards, but that's definitely not a bad thing. There's a lot of nice ramps and great turns, and the track overall is surprisingly fast-paced. There is a pretty big ramp that doesn't have a fall boundary below it, so getting target shocked or target blued there is quite painful. But since the rest of the track is really fun, it doesn't matter way too much. 41, Giant Block Gorge. This track was created by Mackerel Dude 123 for the 5th EXTR competition, where it placed 6th. I don't know how this managed to be a remake of both Bubblegum Heights and Mushroom Gorge at the same time, but it did. And it's done really well. It even has a mini version of the gap jump. We're definitely starting to get to the point where I'm struggling to criticize the tracks here. 40, RMX Black Ice Freeze. This track was made by Kazakura and Atmosphere for the Good EXTR 3 competition, where it placed 6th. I actually find it to be a really cool idea to turn the Black Ice Freeze concept into a serious track. The visual style, although lacking in background detail a little bit, is really cool. The gameplay is also done pretty nicely, there are some good ramps, and the track overall has a nice pace. 39, Lunarian Resort. This track was made by Dreekastian Turnip for the 2nd EXTR competition, where it placed 3rd. It should be no shocker that every D-Turnip track is very high on this list. The fact that this is his weakest track this year says a lot about his overall quality. Like with most D-Turnip tracks, there is a really amazing use of vertex colors here. And the gameplay isn't much weaker than the visuals either. It isn't necessarily the most unique layout, but it works very well nevertheless. 38, Mushroom Village. This track was created by Bits for the 2nd MRFI competition, where it placed 3rd. Yeah, this is the first time that Bits started improving like crazy. There's worlds of a difference between this and, for example, Moo Moo Islands. The visuals obviously look amazing, and the gameplay is a lot better as well. There are some nice shortcuts, and the mushroom section is really interesting. The only reason why I can't put this higher is because there are some pretty long straightaways here. 37, Sparkling Sands. This track was made by Kazakura and Shorkey for the 4th EXTR competition, where it placed 5th. This is another very solid layout by Kazakura. The half pipes are used well, and there is a great shortcut. There is a nice choice of textures, and Shorkey's light map also helps. 36, Fiery Farm. This track was made by Char6432 for the 6th FCFS competition, where it placed 7th. Yeah, the visuals here aren't as fleshed out as what we've seen from the previous tracks, but in turn this track has really good gameplay. I'm actually a fan of blind ramps when they're used in a way that they're satisfying to take, and that definitely applies to this track. It's the same reason as why I like Mushroom Peaks. It's not technically great game design, but it's just really fun in my opinion. 35, Soda Jungle. This track was created by Bits for the 4th EXTR competition, where it placed 3rd. I wouldn't say this is an upgrade from Mushroom Village visually, but gameplay wise it most certainly is. There's a lot of cool design choices. I particularly like the lock, and I mean, come on, who can dislike Soda? 34. Hail Trail. This track was designed by Orcahedron and created by Rex for the 8th CTSS competition, where it placed 4th. Since it's an Orcahedron design, the shortcuts here are really creative. I mean, for one of them, you literally turn around and go backwards for a second. And that's like only one shortcut of at least 4. In general, this track has good gameplay. One of the shortcuts does have a blind turn, though unless you're shrooming, it shouldn't be way too much of a problem. Really interesting visuals too. 33. Galvanized Shipyard. This track was made by Char6432 and Epic Crossover for the 2nd EXTR competition, where it placed 10th. People don't seem to like this as much as I do, which honestly is a pretty big shame, since this track got some very good design choices. I particularly like the shortcut at the finish line where you go on top of the container. Yes, I know this track is more empty than most other tracks around here, but I don't care. If nobody likes this track can be all mine. 32. Antarctic Volcano. This track was made by Dreekastian Turnip, myself, and Kazakura for the 1st EXTR competition, where it placed 1st. I think this was a pretty good first winner. The visuals look absolutely gorgeous because of D-Turnip's vertex colors, and the gameplay, despite being a bit more simplistic than most other winners, holds up as well. There are some nice shortcuts, and the track definitely did a good job setting the standard for future competitions. 31. Misty Mushrooms. This track was designed by AlexTG4517 and created by Pooks for the 8th CTSS competition, where it placed 3rd. This being a track made by Pooks, the gameplay is obviously quite good. There's multiple really solid shortcuts, and the mushroom section is quite satisfying. Visually, it's clean as well. 30. Maple Creek. This track was made by Char6432 for the 5th EXTR competition, where it placed 11th. Visually, this definitely is weaker than most tracks around here, although not bad, I'd say. But what manages to carry this track up all the way into the top 30 is definitely the gameplay. It is very, very good. There's so many different design elements. I absolutely love the turn skip shortcut. If the cannon was less weird, this would be near the top 10. 29. Volcanic Volcano. This track was made by myself for the 2nd MRFI competition, where it placed 1st. For some reason, a lot of people seem to consider this as one of my strongest tracks. I don't really agree, but I still think it's very solid. The main selling point of this is obviously the gameplay. The track is quite fast paced and has some great shortcuts. Visually, it's fine, but I feel like it definitely lacks a bit in background detail compared to other winners. 28. Cherry Garden Square. This track was made by Shorkey for the 6th FCFS competition, where it tied for 3rd. This is easily one of the coolest visual styles that we've seen to this day. There is no other track that even remotely looks like this one. The track is quite short, but does still manage to throw in some decent design choices. 27. Astro Cliff. This track was made by Pooks for the 4th EXTR competition, where it placed 4th. Once again, this track really shines through its gameplay. There are a lot of really great shortcuts and super interesting design choices. Visually, it's great as well, and this cannon right here might just be the coolest thing on this planet. Or in space. I mean, we're not really on this planet here, right? 26. EXTR Galaxy Colosseum. This track was created by Melodic Cat Girl for the 5th EXTR competition, where it placed 3rd. First off, I absolutely love having a track based on Galaxy Colosseum, especially because this one actually includes the Top Man boss. I didn't even know that was possible. The visuals are also incredibly cool. The road looks absolutely stunning. The mushroom shortcut is incredibly random though. I don't even know if it's faster. 25. Cork Resort. This track was made by myself and Epic Crossover for the 4th EXTR competition, where it placed 2nd. This was honestly such a random idea, but it worked out quite well. The visuals are pretty good, but the best part about this track is definitely the shortcuts. Both the cave shortcut and the town shortcut are really satisfying to take. The mountain is a bit of a mess though. I don't really know what I was thinking when modeling it. 24. Unagi's Trench Turbulence. This track was made by myself for the 6th FCFS competition, where it placed 2nd. Obviously, the eel on this track is absolutely peak. I don't know why I made it go twice the speed of light, but I did, and it's absolutely hilarious. The gameplay here is pretty good, but on the visuals, I'm a little bit split. This is the first and only track where I tried to make a light map, and it turned out really messy. The road is also really bright. Still, gameplay-wise, it's great, so I can't really put it lower. 23. Goomba Highlands. This track was made by AlexTG4517 for the 1st MRFI competition, where it placed 3rd. This is another track that really shines through its gameplay. The split pathways in particular are done really well, although the mud can be a little bit blind. I really like the mushroom sections though, and the half pipe looks extremely cool. 22. Trooper Trinity. This track was made by Pooks for the Good EXTR3 competition, where it placed 2nd. I really like how unique the visuals are on this one. The gameplay is also extremely good. The track is filled to the brim with really solid shortcuts and strats. My only issue is that some of the ramps can be pretty easy to just fly over because of the way that they are modeled. That was fixed later in an update, but this video is based on the original versions, so yeah, can't quite put this higher unfortunately. 21. Strawberry Heights. This track was made by Atmosphere for the 3rd MRFI competition, where it placed 5th. This doesn't carry as much weight visually as most of Atmosphere's other tracks, but in turn the gameplay is as great as expected. I especially like the shroomless shortcut in the second half of the track. The split pathways are a good addition as well. One of them does have a pretty tight turn, but it's definitely manageable on Flame Runner. 20. Armax Canada. This track was made by Dreekastian Turnip for the 4th EXTR competition, where it placed 1st. This is a very solid winner for sure. Since it's D-turnip, the visuals are obviously perfect, and the gameplay here slaps as well. The split pathway section is done especially great. 19. Glacial Cavern. This track was designed by MacroDude123 and created by AlexTG4517 for the 8th CTSS competition, where it placed 5th. Once again, ATG is serving great gameplay here. The ramps all work really well, and I like the small shroomless shortcut. The visuals are quite unique, which I can always appreciate. 18. MK Waffle's Basement. This track was made by Bits and Elemental for the 3rd MRFI competition, where it placed 1st. This competition had a very strong top 3, and this track certainly contributed to that. The entire theme and visual style is done so much better than on my version of MK Waffle's Basement. The gameplay is great as well. I especially like the way they executed the changing pathway concept. And there's just so many references and memes on this track, it's actual peak. 17. Pipe Stadium. This track was created by Bits, I Swear Chris, and Forntintakid for the 5th EXTR competition, where it placed 10th. I still have no idea how this placed so low. This easily had both some of the best gameplay and some of the best visuals in its competition. Yes, there is a pretty annoying bug with the half pipes, but in turn, the rest of the track design is just done really well. The track has a great pace, the scaling is done really well. I like the mushroom sections, there's even a cool shroomless shortcut. The fact that this was 13th before the final vote came in genuinely blows my mind. 16. EXTR Rainbow Clouds. This track was made by Iggy Zakupa for the Good EXTR 3 competition, where it placed 4th. This is easily Iggy's best track to date. The gameplay here is incredibly fast paced and extremely fun. There are so many great design choices in basically every section of the track, and the visuals look quite good too. As such, this is our first track to reach the almighty 10 out of 10 rating. 15. Effervescent Ravine. This track was made by Epic Crossover and Char6432 for the 4th EXTR competition, where it placed 7th. Okay, hear me out. I know this track doesn't look as great visually as literally all the tracks around here, but there is a good reason why I have this so high, and that is the gameplay. This is easily one of the most fun tracks to play. The scaling is awesome, the track is incredibly fast paced, there's so many amazing ramps. If the track had some shortcuts, it would be in contention for first place on this list. That's how good the gameplay is here. 14. Enchanted Wonderland. This track was made by myself and Elemental for the 1st MRFI competition, where it placed 1st. While I did prefer another track from this competition, I think this is a pretty solid winner nevertheless. The gameplay in particular has some good aspects about it. I think the shortcuts are done quite well here. The visual style and theming are also pretty unique from anything else. Maybe there are a few too many penguins though, because they can be pretty hard to avoid sometimes. 13. Tooth Decay Way. This track was made by Gcastian Turnip for the Good EXTR 3 competition, where it placed 1st. This track definitely has one of the coolest visual styles out there. There's a ton of background detail everywhere, and the whole track just looks super vibrant and fun. Gameplay wise, it doesn't disappoint either. There are some pretty nice shortcuts, and I especially like many of the design choices in the second half of the track. 12. DS Peach Heights. This track was made by AlexTG4517 for the 5th EXTR competition, where it placed 2nd. Since it's ATG, this obviously serves great gameplay once again. The shortcuts here are done especially well. The whole track flows very nicely and has a good scale. Visually, it's pretty good as well, and it definitely would have been a really good winner if its score had just been a tiny bit higher. 11. Bark Bark Woods. This track was made by Rex for the 6th FCFS competition, where it placed 1st. This is probably one of the weakest winners visually, but in turn, the gameplay is one of the strongest. Pretty much every section feels memorable due to all the shortcuts and objects and literally everything else. This seems like an amazing track to do time trials on. It just barely misses the top 10 by the skin of its teeth. Speaking of which, we have now reached the top 10, in my opinion, best tracks of 2024. And while we're at it, feel free to put your guess for the number 1 track in the comments down below. 10. Planetary Space Road. This track was made by myself for the 2nd EXTR competition, where it placed 2nd. In all honesty, I am probably putting this a little bit too high, but I've just always really enjoyed this one. Sure, I've done better tracks visually, but the whole theme of driving around on 4 planets is just super cool. Gameplay wise, this has also got to be one of my best tracks. There's a lot of great shortcuts here. I especially like the one on the grass planet. Again, this probably isn't top 10 worthy, but I'm just gonna keep it here anyway. 9. Boulder Guy's Not So Lively Lair. This track was created by Bits for the 7th FCFS competition, where it placed 1st. We're definitely starting to get to the strongest winners now. This is incredibly good both visually and gameplay wise. The whole track looks really unique. I love the Boulder Guy's hand objects, and there are some great split pathways as well. Bits definitely outdid himself with this one. 8. Vibrant Light Beneath Gloomy Skies. This track was created by Melodic Cat Girl for the 3rd MRFI competition, where it placed 2nd. This has got to be one of the coolest concepts that we've seen to this day. Visually, it's obviously a massive standout. I don't think I need to explain how cool it is to have this bubble of really vibrant colors surrounded by the whole great track. And the gameplay is not a single bit weaker. The whole track is incredibly fast paced, and it even changes its pathway twice. Literally the only reason why this doesn't place in the top 5 is because one of the half pipes is a bit janky. But if we put that aside, this track is basically perfect. 7. Zing Zing Ruins. This track was made by Atmosphere, Wixboy, and Fafina for the second EXTR competition, where it placed first. Despite being only the second ever competition winner, this one holds up incredibly well. Despite only using Dryja Ruins textures, the visuals here are flawless. The gameplay is very strong as well, there are some pretty great shortcuts. There isn't no lap count bug that was fixed in a later update, but you need to fall off at a very specific section to achieve this anyway. It is a very strong winner. 6. The Yarden EX. This track was made by AlexTG4517 for the second MRFI competition, where it placed second. This should have definitely won over Volcanic Volcano in my opinion. The vertex colors here are used incredibly well. The whole track is really stunning. There's a lot of great ramps, the scaling is perfect, and everything just flows together really well. ATG definitely deserves to win one day. 5. Windows to the Past. This track was made by Drecastian Turnip for the 6th FCFS competition, where it tied for third. This just has such a clever theme. I love how dedicated this is to the old internet days. Visually, it's not technically up to D-Turnip's insane standards, but honestly, it doesn't need to be. Having this older, blockier look honestly makes this track more charming. 4. Seaside Raceway. This track was designed by GeForce and created by myself for the 8th CTSS competition, where it placed first. I know I'm incredibly delusional for putting one of my own tracks as the best winner, but I just can't put it lower. This is easily my best track to date. The gameplay here simply turned out incredible. I especially like the Spyro section. It looks extremely cool and has some very interesting design choices as well. Despite taking up half of the track, it doesn't really feel like it drags on. If this had more shortcuts, this would be number 1 for sure. 3. Shops. This track was created by Atmosphere, Bluebird Star, and Mayro for the first MRFI competition, where it placed second. This track is simply ingenious. It all feels like a massive tribute to the Mario Kart Wii custom track scene. There are so many incredibly creative references on literally every corner of the track. There's even a Waffle House, but like it's a waffle house. But creativity alone doesn't carry a track up to the top 3. The gameplay and visuals also need to be amazing. And thankfully, that is absolutely the case here. Every section feels super memorable to drive through. There's some great split pathways. The moving water requirement couldn't have been used in a more clever way. We are definitely getting very close to perfection here. 2. Lumpy Land. This track was designed by myself and created by Kura, Tarsa129, and Kane the Snowman for the 8th CTSS competition, where it placed second. This might just be the most detail-rich track that we've seen to this day. I could look at this in noclip for hours and still find new things everywhere. The amount of references in this track is incredibly overwhelming. The layout concept is also really creative. Not to mention, the gameplay is very solid as well. This obviously has the rather difficult task of basically being a one-lapper, but it still manages to make nearly every section feel very interesting and different. I am saying nearly every section because the railway section does feel a little bit empty. That is the only reason why this isn't in first. The rest of this track is incredibly strong. But now it is time to reveal what I find to be the best Mario Kart Wii competition hub track of 2024. So, at the number 1 spot, we have Hall of Broken Hearts. From all my airs and graces to the little things I do, everything is pointless without you. This track was made by I Swear Chris for the 3rd MRFI competition, where it placed third. Yes, this name is a bit ridiculous, but don't let that influence you. Visually speaking, this is absolutely untouchable. It shouldn't even be possible to make something like this in Mario Kart Wii of all games. Like Lumpy Land, this is incredibly rich in background detail. The textures used here all look incredible. I mean, look at the river alone. There's even a section where the whole skybox changes. I don't even know how that's possible. And the gameplay is just as incredible. There's so many strats and shortcuts literally everywhere. Every section feels incredibly memorable and unique. Heck, the whole pathway even changes for lap 2. There is exactly one issue with this track. A few sections unfortunately have some pretty significant lag. Thankfully, it's usually very short term, so it doesn't affect the ranking position. But if the lag issue was fixed, this would genuinely be one of my favorite CTs of all time. Like really, this would only be behind the Glimmer Express trains itself. Regardless of what you think of Chris, this track definitely deserves to be at the number 1 spot here, without contention. Hold on for a second, we're not done yet. We are now quickly gonna look at how each separate competition did in this ranking. For those of you who can't do basic maths, this is simply done by taking all tracks from a competition and combining all of their placements into an average. The lower the average, the higher is the general track quality. So in last place at number 11 is EXTR1. This honestly isn't a surprise at all since it's the first and with that oldest competition. There were a lot of solid tracks here, but most of them turned out a bit basic both gameplay wise and visually. And out of all competitions, this is is the only one where I don't have a single track in the top 30. It was still a good competition by all measurements. It's just simply that the competitions that followed this definitely outshined it. Next up at number 10 is EXTR3. This one is also unsurprising since it was split up into a good and a bad competition. And as expected, the bad competition had a lot of really bad joke tracks. In fact, 3 tracks from this competition placed in the bottom 10 on this list. Now, the good competition did have a really solid track lineup, but the bad competition still manages to drag this down all the way to second to last. Then at number 9, we have EXTR2. This one might be a surprise to some since 2 of its tracks made it to the top 10 on this list, but it turns out this one also had a pretty large number of joke tracks overall. And similarly to EXTR1, it also had a lot of middle down the road tracks. At number 8 is EXTR5. This is by far the largest competition in terms of number of tracks, so even though it takes up nearly a fifth of this list's top 50, it has much less of an impact here just because of how many tracks there are. And this one also had a bunch of joke tracks, so once again it's being dragged down a bit by that. Following this at number 7 we have EXTR4. Yeah, the 5 EXTR competitions literally take up the entire bottom 5 of this list. That is mostly down to the fact that the other formats don't usually see nearly as many joke tracks as the EXTR competitions. The 4th edition was definitely the format's highlight though. It actually had one of the strongest tops out of any competition. The entire top 7 was very stacked. But once again, it's the joke tracks, which in this case even includes the last place track from this entire ranking, that once again drags down this competition to a lower place than where it probably should be. At number 6, so right in the middle, is CTSS8. This was pretty surprising to me at first because it's arguably even more stacked at the top than EXTR4. I mean, heck, this competition had literally 2 tracks in the top 5 on this list. But then looking at the bottom 3 from this competition, yeah, it's easy to see why this is not higher. Entering the top 5, we have MRFI3. Again, this had a super stacked top, especially the top 3. I mean, it literally has the number 1 track on this ranking. But then once again, the bottom 3 were pretty bad joke tracks. And yeah, even a small number of joke tracks can have a big impact on the competition's average score. Remember, these are just numbers and stats. If I went by a subjective feeling, I'd probably say this was the strongest competition so far. Still, 4th place ahead of it here, so at number 4 we have MRFI2. This was actually one of the smallest competitions, but I feel like it kind of helped it here. If you have 3 really good tracks in a lineup of 23 tracks, it basically doesn't matter. But if you have 3 really good tracks in a lineup of just 6 tracks, that's already half of all tracks. And as such, it's no shocker that all of the smallest competitions do really well here. Now, MRFI2 specifically still does have a joke track, so it does get dragged out of the top 3 by that. Speaking of the top 3 though, up next is FCFS7. This is actually the smallest competition to date, but its track lineup is quite different from MRFI2. There's only 1 track here that I consider really strong, but in turn, this one doesn't have any joke tracks. It's actually the only competition from 2024 without any joke tracks. But then again, this one had a relatively weak top besides 1st place, and that kind of balances out into a very similar average to MRFI2. The competition with the 2nd highest average turned out to be FCFS6, and yeah, that definitely does make a lot of sense. There's only 1 joke track here, which is less fatal in this case, since this competition has 11 tracks, and besides that one, everything else was at the very least very solid. And the top 4 was probably the most stacked one that we've ever seen. But it's still not quite enough for first, because according to this ranking, the strongest competition of 2024 is MRFI1. I was actually a little bit surprised by this one, but it actually makes sense. The top 3 is really strong, including the 3rd place track on this entire ranking, and since we're only talking about 6 tracks here, that makes a pretty big impact. And while the other 3 tracks weren't amazing, they were still pretty solid. In fact, this is the only competition where not a single track placed outside the top 100. And combining all of these factors together does give this competition the best average out of all of these. There is still one more quick ranking to go through that I'm putting on the screen right now. This time it's all authors having their tracks combined into an average. Now keep in mind, this doesn't really represent the actual quality of each author's tracks. A lot of authors have made a decent number of joke tracks, and since most authors have less than 10 tracks, it drags their average score down quite a lot. For example, even though I have actually won the most competitions out of any author, I have made a large amount of joke tracks, so I only placed 26th on this list. The top 10 here is largely dominated by authors that have only made 1 or 2 tracks that just simply happen to be really good ones. If we look at the authors that have made 5 or more tracks, it's not much of a surprise that Atmosphere, AlexTG4517 and Drecastian Turnip placed the highest here. I can safely say though that every single author made at least something good at some point. So a huge thank you goes out to all of the authors that have made the competition hub possible. And now it is finally time for this video to come to an end. Thank you guys very much for watching. I put a lot of time in this video, so if you enjoyed, then feel free to leave leave a like and a sub. If you're interested in watching these competitions live or participating even, then feel free to join the Mario Kart Wii Competition Hub Discord server, which is down in the video description. And yeah, I hope you guys are having a very much wonderful day, and I will see you guys in the next video. And as always, enjoy Wario on drugs.